What if the Soviet Union collapsed way sooner, like when Stalin died? That's like a whole 40 years earlier. This video is by AltHistoryHub.
Alternate History Golden Goose or Dead Horse I Can't Stop Beating.
You and me both,
decide.
buddy. You and
as
me
much
both.
as the war has become a cliche at this point.
I can't even help it. I just love talking about World War II the most. And it's like the biggest event that shaped our modern time. It's just so easy to like look back and see why everything that is currently, how do I phrase this? The way things are currently right now, it's very likely due to World War II or the following parts after World War II.
I mean, hey, it makes sense. Just this 6-year span of time, foreign freedom units were so packed with events that had
because the Americans didn't join in freedom units until 1941.
On differently, it would have changed a lot. Even if Germany still loses the war, the world after that defeat was not predetermined. It was shaped by closed-door meetings, shifting priorities, inner power struggles, and even failed assassinations. Speaking of which, Operation Zeppelin, a failed German operation in late 1944, where a Soviet deserter flew from Riga in an attempt to assassinate Joseph Stalin.
Oh, I've heard about that.
You thought I was talking about the other assassination. Oh no, that's a different video. We're taking out Stalin today.
Yeah.
You might be thinking,
why haven't they made that movie yet? That seems like gold.
How the hell does that even relate to this weird video title? Well, I want to imagine a reality where Stalin gets shot in November 1944, which sets off a chain of...
Okay, so we're not even talking about at his death. This is a new death, so this is before World War II even ends. That's so crazy to think about.
Events that, in this alternate scenario, lead to the downfall of the Soviet Union by 1950.
That's insane. So do they dissolve the same way they did in the 90s, obviously? Does it break apart into like the Russian Federation? Does Ukraine become independent? That's my first thought. Or is it just one massive... I don't think they're going to go back to monarchies. They're not going to go back to just the Russian monarchy. I wouldn't guess the Russian Empire, but it's democratic.
No, it's not Operation Downfall. The year is 1944. The roaring engines of American industry were ignited, Lend-Lease would reach its peak, and the Axis were in retreat after Stalingrad and Kursk. But they weren't down for the count. The Allies had taken Sicily and southern Italy, but were struggling to make progress.
Yeah, I remember this propaganda poster where they're like, it's like crawling, it's like showing like just maybe a couple miles north along the Italian peninsula, but it was showing like by 1946 we'll make it here, by 1948 only 10 million dead or something like that.
Plans were underway for the invasion of Normandy and the Philippines. By 1944, the Big Three began to split apart,
because the dub was surely going to come. We just didn't know who was going to get the biggest piece out of it. I mean, remember that the UK and the Americans and the Brits, they just didn't want the Soviets to just roll over continental Europe.
The leader
They had to have a D-Day. They had to start that second front, get to Berlin as fast as possible.
Had a different vision on what this post-war world might look like. Roosevelt was focused on founding the United Nations.
I mean, you could say that it was over by 1942. Late 1942, it was going to be obvious that the Germans were eventually going to collapse. So that's 2 years after that. This was how much they started to see what the world was going to shape up to be after this massive fight that took place.
Favored a new order of republics. Notably, he wanted to build up China as a new great power. Congress backed his plans, but he understood that he couldn't drag his feet forever. This war needed to be put to a...
Remember, this is like pre-communist China, so we didn't know what was going to come out. The Chinese Civil War was 1949. That's when they, Mao officially took power and won the whole thing.
Swift end. Churchill strived to preserve the British Empire and fend off communism, believing in the tradition of monarchy. Because of that, he was actually against the D-Day landings, instead hoping to attack Yugoslavia, march on Vienna, and cut off the Soviets.
As
for Stalin, he felt like the blood spilt by his people gave him a right to the biggest chunk of the pie.
I mean, it's hard to argue against that, to be honest. I mean, dang, he kind of has a point if that's his argument.
He would use the counterattack to spread the Soviet ideology as far as he could.
Yeah.
Armies were mobilized, plans were made.
I think this scenario is really going to depend on who takes power, right? Like, what next communist power? Well, if the Soviet Union... the video is called... what if the death of Stalin destroyed the Soviet Union? So I guess we wouldn't have another comrade like in his cabinet that takes power.
And
But yeah, it's really going to depend on who takes power, right?
at Tehran, Churchill was outvoted. D-Day was going to happen, coinciding with a major push from the Soviets, and all sides agreeing that they'd accept nothing.
That would be crazy if the Allies went up through Austria, if they had a D-Day invasion through Yugoslavia. Like, that would have been, imagine like, that makes me think of a world where like Poland is actually the nation that's divided between West and East Poland.
But an unconditional
As if that country has not already been through enough.
surrender. Roosevelt and Stalin reluctantly sacrificed Eastern Poland, compensating it with
There it is. There it is. I swear, every time I watch some, just videos in general, I'll say something and then like the next moment, we start talking about it.
lands taken from Germany, in return for the Soviet pledge to attack Japan 3 months after Germany was dealt with. Roosevelt got a slight nod from the other two for his UN project, and then they all got to work. Spoilers, but D-Day was kind of a success. By September, all of France was liberated, and the Soviet army penetrated the Balkans. Finland, Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, and Greece folded almost instantaneously, with tens of thousands of Wehrmacht soldiers left on their own. The fate of Europe was to be
A lot of those nations switched really fast. I think it was Romania that switched really, really fast.
decided in just a few weeks, and Stalin decided he was no longer with the Big Three. It was now just the Big
Communism.
Me. An urgent meeting was called, this time in Moscow. But due to his re-election campaign, Roosevelt couldn't attend. He really needed to get that fourth term. October 1944. Churchill flew over to the
Which is funny statement just because he was going to die soon after that. Obviously, Truman takes power during the end days of World War II.
Soviet capital in a desperate attempt to safeguard British shipping. His goal? Prevent the Russian bear from gripping Greece and establishing zones of influence. But here, we see Stalin at his best. Stalin's stoic, smart. He plays Churchill like a fiddle. Old Joseph rubs salt into the wound, as he pointed out that Roosevelt agreed to the outrageous idea of forcing the British to give Hong Kong back to the Chinese, half of which was in Japanese hands. He outlined the hypocrisy of America controlling the Panama Strait, Britain owning the Suez, while the Soviets were blocked off from the Bosphorus. Tisk tisk.
Dang.
A small note was
Love that animation on his face. Look at this little sly smile he got going on right here. That's crazy.
Soviets were blocked off from the Bosphorus. Tisk tisk. A small note was passed around between the two leaders like they were schoolgirls or something, and that schoolgirl note changed history forever.
Reminds me of the Zimmerman letter in World War I. Obviously a little bit different, though. Hey, want to change history forever?
Rather than being called the Moscow Conference of 1944, or being referenced by its codename, Tolstoy, this meeting is now remembered as the Percentages Agreement. That's really the name they went with, huh? See, I prefer the nickname coined by Churchill, the Naughty Document. This small sheet of paper, which survives to this day, outlined zones of influence in which the British and the Soviets divide Eastern Europe between themselves. Uncle Sam was not in the room, and in just one meeting, Stalin had Churchill legitimize the Soviet violent takeover of Romania and Bulgaria, planting the seed for the future. The Prime Minister was so glad to...
Just more Winston Churchill hatred, more reason for why a lot of people do not like this former British leader.
...secure a Soviet-free Greece. He even managed to get Stalin to
Okay, well, Greece is going to be happy about that.
...reluctantly agree to a French occupation zone in Germany. This was aimed to restore French confidence. Give them just something to go on for. America had...
That's a crazy joke, but I get it. I mean, yeah, they'd been occupied for a while there. That probably really hurt their egos.
...a representative present who...
Especially the French. Especially the French. I mean, to be fair, they did lose to the Germans. They lost to the Prussians for German unification, but they lost in a whole completely different way for World War II. Like, that must have been a huge blow.
...laid some of this stuff back to the president, but the fact that even this representative didn't know about the percentage split tells you all you need to know. Keep in mind that Churchill's own doctor, Lord Moran, had this to say in his diary just 40 days before the meeting. Problem is that he was also petrified of America going back to isolationism. Churchill knew that he was making a deal with...
I mean, it's only a matter of time before America go back to isolationism. Like, that's just what we do. That's just how we handle things.
The devil. And the worst part is that after getting everything he wanted, Stalin still broke the deal. Okay, so apart from being kind of interesting, what's the point of any of that? Well, you see, this is very important, because in this alternate timeline, we're gonna have Stalin die a month after this meeting. Time to throw everything into chaos.
Nice.
After Barbarossa, the Germans captured many Soviet POWs. With this, they developed a special operation, one where they handpicked some of these men to act as secret agents. In its first year alone, 3,000 agents graduated from the program.
Dang.
Some were saboteurs, others military experts who prepared maps and charts of Soviet regions. At one point, the Axis had between 500 and 800 agents behind enemy lines.
That's pretty genius. That's pretty genius. We have to give credit where credit is due right here.
Enter Agent Officer Shiloh. Captured in May 1942, he quickly rose through the program, going from a one-use agent to a valuable asset.
Oh, is this the guy who's gonna murder Stalin? I'm guessing that's where we're gonna go with this.
He passed all the tests, bragged about his medals and connections in Moscow. After witnessing the failures of the Wehrmacht, Mustache Man turned to more unconventional means for victory.
Going after the Fountain of Youth. He liked to do that wild stuff, the Holy Grail or something like that.
V2 missiles, super weapons.
The super weapon. Okay, that too. That also counts.
And espionage. The plan was for this deserter to assume the identity of Major Peter Tavrin. For the disguise, he'd get a spare set of documents of an officer who arrived from the hospital for treatment. In order to confirm the story, he underwent several plastic surgeries to imitate traces of severe wounds on his body. The saboteur's chest was decorated with orders, medals, and even a genuine star of the hero of the Soviet Union, taken from killed officers. Newspapers with decrees on awards were put into a field bag, where, among others, the name Tavrin was mentioned. For his weapon, Peter was equipped with...
Whoa, what PS1 layout is this? This is giving me some old school video game vibes.
With 2 hidden pistols with explosive...
Press square, well there you go, PS1, square and circle, press a circle for fire explosive bullets.
And poisonous bullets, alongside an incendiary
Classic
device inside
stuff.
a briefcase, controlled by radio. He even had a miniature grenade attached to his arm, in case the gun and briefcase somehow failed. To conceal all of this, he was given a special leather coat with an extended right sleeve. The target? Joseph Stalin himself, present for the annual October Revolution Parade, celebrated the 7th of every November, Julian calendar. On the night of September 3rd, a lone transport plane carrying Peter and his wife flew off from Riga. Things went sideways immediately. The plane was shot at by anti-aircraft guns near Smolensk. Somehow, the damaged aircraft was able to make an emergency landing.
Wow.
And the pair escaped the wreckage by motorcycle.
Actually,
they would have to travel to Moscow.
It amazes me some of the because I have a morbid curiosity with like plane crashes and accidents and things like that. First of all, the fact that we were just even in the air in the 40s, the 30s, it's insane to me because we have like massive, aviation mistakes that take place in the 2000s right now. I mean, they're having it's like amazing that we were able to take planes back in the 40s and just live to tell the tale.
By bike. Until they were apprehended by the NKVD, the Soviet secret police. The thing is, even after all the preparation, Peter wore that shiny medal on his left shoulder instead of his right. Big mistake. But also carrying special Bond-level equipment? Ooh, that's a one-way ticket to the gulag, buddy. So what if they just hadn't been shot down?
I like the background. Very nice.
Or been caught. They would have had a chance, right? No. Turns out the game was rigged from the start. Thanks to Allied counterintelligence, the Soviets knew about every step of this plan for an entire year. They knew about the coat, the plane from Riga, and they just played along the entire time.
That's
letting
crazy.
The spy continue to send telegrams to the Führer.
That's
Even
crazy.
A month before Berlin fell, the Russians were still gaslighting the Germans.
That's so, man, I mean, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised they were going above and beyond to do a little bit of trolling just because of everything that happened. The Germans launched that invasion, just killed so many of their people.
Making their agents think they
were gonna get
still
their
had
revenge.
a chance. This was basically a big prank by the Soviets aimed to waste Axis time. And when the plan was
Worked, that's for sure.
finally carried out, they shot the plane down and sent like 150 agents to arrest the spy. The Germans
That's
never
hilarious.
had a chance. All that planning, and it went to waste. So let's fix that. November 1944. Joseph Stalin is
So the Germans only technically have a couple of months to survive. Is this a world where there's no way the Germans can come back, right? Sorry. Well, maybe if I thought I misspoke, but I didn't. Can the Germans come back maybe if the Russians are thrown into another civil war again, just like they were in World War I?
shot.
People forget the Germans got the dub over the Russians in World War I because of the chaos that was taking place back behind enemy lines.
Dead in the middle of Red Square. Special Agent Peter might have been the one who pulled the trigger.
He actually did
but
it.
The man behind it all was a Soviet. The only way Peter got that far was thanks to Lavrenti Beria. Beria was the head of the NKVD secret police. And in this alternate timeline, rather than stopping the infiltrators, he has another idea. Through intentional inaction, he guides the assassin to their target. Beria gets Stalin out of the way. Now, Beria was way worse than Stalin. Like,
Way
this guy is
worse.
easily one of the most evil monsters who ever lived.
Oh.
This Soviet version of Himmler was the instrument
Soviet version of Himmler. I can't even wrap my head around that. That's a terrifying thought.
Stalin used to conduct the Great Purge. Gulags, executions, famine, stamping out dissent by wiping out
That's
entire
how.
villages. There was nothing Beria wouldn't do. But it went even farther than that. Went into stuff that wasn't even politics. His crimes were so degenerate and evil, I cannot say them on YouTube.
Dang.
Maybe I'll just list them off in the Patreon version of this video or something. So,
Now I'm gonna have
go see that version if you
gonna
want to
have
hear
to
some
go check that
stuff
out.
that'll absolutely ruin your day. To get somewhat of an idea,
I'm not surprised. The purges that went on, pretty horrific. With the Photoshop, everyone knows about the Photoshop meme. People photoshopping great generals out, but there was a lot more horrific things that happened than just that.
though. Let's say that there was a discovery made in a Moscow basement containing piles of bones, including children. Before he was taken out and put down like a dog, Hannibal Lecter had stacked the secret police with loyal supporters. Beria had become so powerful that even Uncle Joseph flirted with the idea of taking him out.
Damn.
In fact, when the Man of Steel did die 10 years later in our timeline, Beria
The Man of Steel. I forgot that he has the same Superman name, huh? That's crazy.
made a bid for power, and that really didn't work out. In this alternate 1944, while he's still hated by virtually everyone else in power, instead of being reactive when Stalin dies, he's proactive. Let's say that after catching Peter and his wife in September, Beria is given 2 full months to prepare his violent takeover. A takeover at the perfect possible time. Thanks to a decentralized military command, the war could still carry on. But most importantly, the bulk of the generals who absolutely hated Beria and the NKVD would be far from reach. Stalin did everything he could to prevent a natural succession, as he thought he was invincible even later into his life. There were still a few clear options though, with
Literally, All History Hub himself.
Beria being in the top 3 since he was one of the most fanatical Stalinists. He even wrote a book about the guy. One thing Beria loved more than Stalin though was power, and also something
Not surprising. That's when you start glazing leaders like this. I'm thinking you just kind of like power at the same time.
else, but we're not going to talk about that. Betrayal isn't entirely
boy.
out of Beria's character. Let's assume Khrushchev, Molotov, and Malenkov are all rounded up and never seen again. RIP. The only other threat to Beria's eccentric
Was Molotov thought for the power after Stalin died from the Ribbentrop Molotov pact?
was Marshal Zhukov.
That's news.
But
I didn't know
since
that
he
was
was
news to
fighting
me.
in Poland, he wasn't an immediate threat. The state apparatus would grind to a halt as a new purge was underway, but this doesn't change much on the battlefield. Taking out Stalin would have far more repercussions if done in the dire phases of the war. But by 1944, The Red Army was on autopilot towards Berlin. Another thing to consider is just how slowly news traveled, especially when impeded by the NKVD.
True, yeah, that's what I always wonder, you know, like when you play a game like Hearts of Iron 4 or something like that, you know, you're seeing the map in live action, essentially. You're getting information exactly where all the troops were, all the divisions, but it's like, in reality, that's not how the situation was going to be. Like, you didn't really know what this front is looking like, maybe this specific part of this front, for a while. It just depends on when the message gets back to you. There's many video games that tackle this, like, this problem that, you know, a lot of other Paradox games have, or even Civilization games, or Total War games. Like, you don't even really know what's going on here in, like, the middle of nowhere, the rural area. You don't know exactly what divisions are where. You just hear some news. Last we heard 2 weeks ago they was here, but it's been 2 weeks, so we don't know where they are actually in this exact moment.
So by the end of 1944, Beria is firmly in charge. But how does that lead to the title of the video? By 1954, Stalin had overstayed his welcome. His peacetime policies were not the best. Mixed in with his paranoia, the Soviet political climate had everyone ready to take down the cult of personality he had built. If he gets shot in the middle of World War II instead, he dies a martyr. A hero who saved the Soviet people from the brink of destruction and was killed by a traitor sponsored by fascists. For the Germans, Stalin's death is a massive morale boost. Fighting in the East and West intensifies.
So this is where this is where we are going to see, maybe if the Germans are able to turn it back around, which I don't think I think it's over. No matter what the Germans do to push into the Eastern Front, I think the UK, the Brits, and the Americans, they're just going to take that over from the West.
Operation Market
Unless they can pull resources away from the Eastern Front now. That could be huge.
Garden, which was already an arguable disaster, is followed up by even more fanatical counterattacks. As for the Allies, the man who Roosevelt and Churchill referred to as Uncle Joseph was a key ally. The unpredictability brought in by this new Beria would be a catastrophe. Eastern Europe had just fallen, and after the liberation of France, Eisenhower was appalled at the logistical situation, even calling for the stop of all bombing raids against the railways. In our timeline, the Allies saw no point in rushing for Berlin. In their mind, the German partition meant that the East would go to the Soviets, so there would be no strategic merit for advancing ahead of schedule. Yet now, with Stalin dead, the agreement for both Eastern Europe and Germany's fate is just up in the air.
Wow.
Nobody has a clue if the new leadership would actually honor Stalin's word.
Italy run around
a few
Greece,
months later,
France.
they'd meet the new leader, and hopefully come to an understanding at the Yalta Conference. February 1945.
So the Germans only have like 3 months at this point.
Long 7,000-mile trip followed by the trek to...
So we're focusing on, obviously, Europe, which makes sense. However, what would this... I'm thinking about Japan. I'm thinking about fascist Imperial Japan. Because they were very worried about the Soviets. The Soviets didn't actually press forward into Manchuria until after Hitler was dealt with. But I'm thinking the Japanese would be pretty happy with this news.
Yalta saps Roosevelt of his last remaining...
I think the Japanese are probably ultimately still going to get nuked and destroyed, but...
strength. Witnesses reported that the 75-year-old president stared at nothing, with his mouth open for prolonged periods. FDR was in bad shape. He passed away 2 months later. Beria was privy to all of Stalin's ideas, and he had a lot to prove. His most important and very militaristic adversary, Zhukov, would never allow him to even pretend to make the compromises Stalin gave. What could this dying president and prime minister of a depleted empire truly do to stop the Soviets? Beria could refuse their demands, or at the very least, make some new ones of his own. Okay, so let's review the promises Stalin made, kept, and cards he kept off the table in 1945. Stalin agreed to help against the Japanese in return for influence and some islands. He agreed to help Roosevelt form the United Nations if the Soviet republics of Belarus and Ukraine were given a separate vote. Lastly, he reluctantly accepted France's occupation zone, but never viewed them as an actual power, due to them being France in World War II. Now, for the most important one, a free European buffer zone. Austria was to be divided like Germany.
Oh, you know what's crazy? I've literally seen maps like that. I've seen Austria broken down exactly the way you would... Well, you know, because the Germans were broken down like that in World War II, but then a whole separate region for Austria as well, broken down similarly.
Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Romania, and
with
Bulgaria
other
were to
powers.
hold elections without foreign interference and be free. Here, it was Churchill who made significant concessions to the Americans, who were against his whole imperialistic notions of monarchy. Churchill even dreamt of creating 3 new unions, those of Yugoslavia with Greece, Czechoslovakia, and Poland.
The obsession that people have with creating unions, it's kind of funny, it's kind of fascinating. I think we finally learned that, yeah, we probably shouldn't do that. It's probably better just to heavily splinter the world, heavily balkanize the world than creating these unions. I mean, a lot of chaos happens in these nations.
And even bringing back the good old Austro-Hungarians.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah, I do remember
None
that.
of this was happening, and Stalin stalled at the negotiation table. All while his army was setting up the Warsaw Pact. As for the cards Stalin kept off the table, but were heavily discussed within his inner circle, we have a battered but unified and democratic Germany, think post-World War I, weird, I know, Soviet control of the Bosphorus, which sparked the first crisis of the Cold War in 1946, full Soviet control of Berlin, later leading to the Berlin airlift.
It's interesting to think of 1946 as the possible Cold War. Like, I feel like the Cold War, it did start after World War II, for sure, but it didn't feel like it was at its height yet. It didn't feel like it was really starting with like high intensity in 1946. I would say 1949 maybe?
Keeping Soviet troops in northern Iran, which led to the 46 Iran crisis. And last, a deep desire to punish the Italians for siding with Germany, despite the Allied sentiment to let bygones be bygones.
Let the Italians
Now ask
go.
yourself, would Beria, who wanted to seem strong in the face of Western imperialism, stall like Stalin did? After all, in early 1945, the Manhattan Project wasn't unveiled yet.
Was that, oh my gosh, that picture of Barbie, the Barbie nuke? Barbenheimer, I remember when, oh, those were some great memes.
Stall like Stalin did. After all, in early 1945, the Manhattan Project wasn't unveiled yet. The Soviet Army's ego was as large as its manpower pool, and unlike the Americans, who already wanted to go home and start baby booming, Soviet soldiers were better off looting in the now warm front lines. Most importantly, Roosevelt craved Soviet interference against Japan, as much as Churchill craved American aid against Germany. Beria would understand that if he planted his foot down, there was nothing the Americans or British could do to stop him. What does Roosevelt do? Honestly, I'm not 100%.
When does this collapse take place? I'm assuming that we're going to get into it here, but yeah, when is the Soviet, and how is it going to happen? There's so many questions I have.
Sure. This is an impasse, and uncomfortable situation we never really had in our time. So, let's just say the scenario is a toss-up. 50-50. Since the pressure for both ideas is pretty massive. Perhaps FDR accepts several of the Soviet demands, like the Strait in Iran, while alienating his cabinet and allies. Or perhaps Churchill tells Beria to piss off, and we have a whole Operation Downfall. For the sake of the scenario, let's say FDR goes with the former, capitulating to some Soviet demands, enraging pretty much everyone around him in an effort to save American lives. Keep in mind, this is the exact reason why the Secretary of State Cordell Hull resigned in '44. He and many others hated that Roosevelt personally handled major negotiations instead of relying on...
Look at this interesting hat that Churchill's rocking right here. Like, what is that? It almost looks like one of those Turkish hats. If it had like the fez, is it the fez? I don't know, but I don't think I've seen this image before. I don't remember him having this hat.
On the State Department. Others hated him for his over-reliance on the Soviets, the Mediterranean distraction, and Europe First strategy that left the Pacific theater with less resources. France, Italy, Turkey, and all of Eastern Europe would be thrown under the bus as the two sides make their final march on Berlin.
Final push to Berlin.
This move secures Beria's leadership and the support of the generals, who he needed to keep in line after spending so much of his time persecuting them in the past. Churchill, Eisenhower, McCarthy, and many others would be so enraged. One Trinity test and a new President Truman later, nothing about the war really changes, except for one significant divergence. In our timeline, Hiroshima and Nagasaki were a major wake-up call for Stalin. The Soviets had a nuclear program of their own, but
it's going to take them a couple more years. They got to get a little bit more information before they was really going to make that go crazy.
It was poorly run by bureaucrats. Once he saw the bombs in action, Stalin appointed Beria himself as chief architect of the program. Beria lacked Oppenheimer's talent for uniting people, and wasn't a logistical mastermind like...
Is that surprising? Nah, that's not surprising. Oh, I love the Oppenheimer references, because, I mean, that's the movie that's fresh on everyone's mind. That movie made a lot of money, so nice to see what character in the film was supposed to display the real person.
General Groves. He did, however, have a spy network, one that orchestrated one of the greatest acts of industrial espionage in history. Within just 4 years, the Soviets copied the Americans' homework, caught up, and got an atomic bomb of their own. This is the major divergence of the entire scenario. This is why the video title is the way it is. As you see, Beria being in charge of the Soviet Union isn't the major factor here. It's Beria not being in charge of this specific spy operation, because his priorities would have shifted in this alternate timeline. He couldn't steer the Soviet Union in the midst of its most turbulent period while also conducting this massive heist.
Yeah.
That's like asking General Groves to run Manhattan while invading Japan.
Crazy.
I'm not saying that in the scenario the Soviets would have never gone a bomb, because they certainly would have. They had German scientists and a ton of resources. I'm simply suggesting that something here would have changed. Something would have gotten delayed in the spy game. Perhaps instead of 4 years to get the bomb, it takes the Soviets 6, or even 10. In the post-World War II landscape, this would be huge. When it comes to history, timing is everything. In this alternate timeline, when FDR's pact with Beria is made, it's seen as an embarrassing stain, but also a necessity to avoid another war and the death of over 500,000 Americans. Yet by 1946, just like in our time, America is now in possession of the most powerful weapon on the planet, paired with the strongest air force, all while Beria's true face is slowly revealed. Churchill is still ousted from government in the 1945 general elections.
Yeah, he done.
And the British are still firmly with Truman in his anti-Soviet stance. In our 1946, America sent a warship to protect Turkey's Bosphorus Strait, and armed Iran against the Soviet forces who refused to withdraw. In 48, Truman organized the Berlin airlift, and then 2 years later took swift action in the Korean War. Similar events, sure, but the conditions are different.
I mean, yeah, you could say that again. A completely different Soviet Union that you're dealing with.
The military now is even more disgruntled by the end of the war. Truman and Beria would clash, and Beria is the key to all of this. How does an overconfident Beria...
We got Republican Spain. We got a Republican Spain here, right here. Is that supposed to be... Are they supposed to be communist in this timeline, or socialist? Still a fascist Italy, Austria, Hungary, France, Poland, Greece.
Act on the world stage when given the power of Stalin? Would he even know when to back down from these situations like Stalin did? Or would he perhaps go further out of fear that he could be seen as weak by his internal enemies? Beria wouldn't be the hero of the Soviets like Stalin had been, nor would he be in that safe of a position. He's really a bit of a wild card here, and he's certainly not...
I wonder if the other leaders at this time would think of that the same way. That might cause a lot of fear in them, because they don't know anything about him. They don't know how he's going to react and do certain things. Because, I mean, it's all just a game. Politics, a game that people, lose their lives on. But, yeah, it's just all crazy. freaky game.
Not the best in charge of the Soviet state during a time when cooler heads really should prevail. Perhaps in this alternate timeline, things go a bit too far.
1945 Manchuria takeover, 1945 Iran crisis, 1946 Keenan's long telegram, 1946 also Churchill's Iron Curtain speech.
One of these crises spiral out of control, leading to the war that everyone expected to happen to actually happen. But in this alternate world, the Soviets would not be a nuclear power.
So they would just get nuked into oblivion because their Red Army was unstoppable. That's the big thing, that the formation of NATO, the reason why the Western Europeans were so freaked out, that Red Army was ready to go.
The U.S. would be uncontested
and they just
in that
nuked
regard.
the crap.
When asking the question, what if the Allies beat the Soviets?
That's such a terrifying thought. If that's what we're getting at with this video, because I've been asking for like 20 minutes now, like, where are we going with this? Where are we going with this? Where are we going with this? And now, is it just a world where the U.S. nukes everything?
Soviets by 1950. We're talking about a post-war world that is far messier than our own time. Beria on the world stage is no Stalin. He's trusted by nobody at home or abroad.
Oh, so is there a collapse?
And that's dangerous. So really, the crux of the video is, what if somehow relations deteriorated to such a level that the West and Soviets went to war within the 1940s? First, the whole Beria takeover means that the Soviet leadership takes a massive hit.
Yeah.
Restructuring the entire government apparatus is hard enough in peacetime. To do it in the mid—
Yeah, I mean, Stalin's death did come at a pretty fortunate time, obviously not during World War II. I mean, by 53, you know, obviously the Cold War was really ramping up, but could have been way worse. Obviously, 1944 would have been way, way, way worse.
Midst of a war with extended supply lines is just crazy. This isn't that big of a deal during the war while the Germans were collapsing, but it is a big deal in a new war against the West. A lot of key bureaucrats and generals would have been sent off to the Gulag during and especially after Germany's capitulation. You can have as much manpower as you want. If you don't have capable generals to lead them, you're just throwing bodies in a ditch. Next, we have logistics. When people imagine Operation Unthinkable, they imagine the Allies fighting the Soviets. But so much of that Soviet army was already on the American payroll. They were provided with 300,000 jeeps and trucks, 12,000 armored vehicles,
People forget about this.
7,000 tanks.
People forget, this is oftentimes, like, people that are really pro-American love to bring this stuff up when it comes to who contributed the most. Whenever someone says the Soviets, they definitely always include the amount of stuff that we gave to the Soviet Union, which is a very big deal. It's very significant.
11,400 aircraft and 1.75 million tons of food.
Man, I thought it was legitimately hamburgers. That'd been so funny to give the Russians, the Soviets at this time, hamburgers as the Americans. Like, really, guys?
The Soviet war machine ran—
I wonder what the equivalent of that would be to, like, in like 2025 terms. Imagine giving like a country hot Cheetos to fuel their empire off of.
And on American oil, American food, with soldiers driven to the front line on American tanks and trucks. Now that I think about it, it would be pretty fitting for the US to fight a war with people they literally just supplied. Now, would
Vietnam and Afghanistan, we're so used to that. We are so used to that. And yeah, that would have been perfect. Like, because we did supply the Soviets a lot of equipment. So yeah, it would have made sense to fight with them. You could say the same thing about the British. That'd been kind of funny too with Lend-Lease Act. We gave the British a whole bunch of things too. Imagine we fought them.
Would this be that dramatic of a factor in the war? Maybe. Soviets would have supply issues. Yeah, but I don't know if the Allied public would tolerate such losses in a profound conflict right after World War II. Speaking of losses, the Soviets had a lot. If you had the bad luck of being born a man in the Soviet Union in the 1910s,
oh, you're dead.
The likelihood of you celebrating your 21st birthday—
It's like 25%. You have a 25% chance, maybe?
Was just 20%.
Oh, 20.
In our time, they were able to at least rest—
You're 20? You're 20?
And replenish a little bit. But needing to fight almost immediately and still hold Europe might be asking too much of the Red Army. They would be fighting not only the Allies, but Poles, Germans, Czechs, Serbs, and many others, all of which the Americans would be arming. That's
because we're just a giant factory. At this time, don't forget, the Americans are literally just a giant factory. You know, you destroy one ship, we come back with 3 more.
said though, on the ground, I think this would be an even fight.
Because no one can hit us. Like, I mean, that's the thing. Like, you can't. It's hard to do bombing air raids at this time on the North American continent, specifically the U.S. territory.
Even with the disadvantages the Soviets had, they would make some progress.
Oh yeah.
But there's one
Oh yeah. You still cannot count out the Red Army.
place the Soviets wouldn't be able to fight, and that's the air. Look, there's really no reason to talk about alternate tactics and strategy in this war, because holy hell is there an Air Force imbalance between these two. Like I mentioned
The Americans are gonna utterly obliterate
in that Dunkirk
Soviet Air Force. It's gonna be crazy.
video, America funded the creation of a bomber fleet 3 times as expensive as the Manhattan Project.
That's
it cost
crazy.
3 times more to make a plane fly higher than it was to split the atom.
Insane.
The U.S. specialized in building.
I mean, does that have anything to do with inflation? Maybe inflation has to do a little bit with it, but 3 times that, yeah, inflation can't be 3 times for that.
high
Can't
altitude
explain the 3 times cost.
long-range bombers, which are extremely difficult to make. The ultimate payoff being that you could fly over anywhere without an escort and just drop the bombs. All this talk of logistics and manpower really mean nothing when the B-50 Superfortress exists. In 1947, there was nothing, and I do mean nothing, stopping the B-50 Superfortress from firebombing or even nuking Moscow. This thing flew so high,
That's
no
crazy.
technology was capable of hitting it. That high altitude made any radar, anti-air guns, and even fighter planes absolutely useless.
That's
There
insane
was
to think
nothing
about.
so untouchable in human history as this dumb plane. Even today, we have the ability to shoot things down with missiles. They didn't. In this hypothetical war, for a brief amount of time, if the US wanted to nuke the Soviets from the sky, they just could.
Damn.
The Allies knew where all the industrial
And the thing is, I mean, would that guarantee them the win, though? I mean, they could nuke the crap out of the Soviets. Remember, it would take years, though. It would take a while, because we weren't able to make that many nukes that fast. I think by the 50s we could, for sure, but in the early days, it depends on, well, when did this war start up, this theoretical war? Like 1946?
centers were
46, it'd still take us some time to really build up a lot of nukes.
and would be able to take most of them out. Bye-bye, Siberia.
But nuking Moscow is not going to be enough to destroy the Red Army, but yeah.
Railroad. So long, Caucasus oil fields. Unless the Soviets
Although nukes are not the only thing here, that's why we're talking about aviation, bombing, air raids, firebombing, all that stuff.
traveled
That would all make a huge difference, cause a very big impact to the Soviet Union.
into the future and brought back a couple of MiG-15s from 1949, they're ruined. In just 1947, Congo uranium and the American industry could make a nuclear arsenal ranging between a few dozen to 100 nukes. Even without the delay in the Soviet nuclear program, which would certainly be there, what exactly is the Soviet response here? On the ground, they're still a capable force, but everywhere else, they have nothing. Within a month, the Allies have complete aerial and naval dominance. And this isn't pretty. Think of this in human terms.
Yeah, there's no doubt. The Soviets never really were able to have that strong of a navy, but
I'm talking about a couple of months where the horrors of Nagasaki and Hiroshima are repeated in every major Russian city.
that's the
The
only,
Red Army
'cause we would have to stop the Red Army. Like, you would have to just do the most egregious things. They would be horrifying.
Army, even if it made gains, would be bombed to shreds behind the front lines.
Because we just wouldn't be able to do anything else. Like, that's the thing. It would be, yeah, we would have to go for the throat, essentially, with all those nukes.
Armed guerrilla groups in Germany, the Balkans, Iran, and Korea disrupt supply lines. As we saw in World War II, the real problems here are fighting the enemy on his own soil. Despite their grasp on Europe, the Germans gave it all up pretty quickly. France was liberated in a month. Romania instantly switched, despite
it was Romania,
300,000 Germans defending it. Italy, Hungary, and Bulgaria flipped almost instantly. Would the war really even reach this level? I'm not sure. There is the morality here to consider. I'm sure certain elements of the American military wouldn't care.
Oh,
but
yeah.
I don't know if
I don't think we'd care that much. Certain elements, yes.
Truman would really go all the way. We are talking about the man who didn't want to turn the Chinese-Korean border into a sea of radioactive cobalt.
Yes, MacArthur, that is right, MacArthur. No, we're not going to do that. I was thinking of that same thing. I was thinking of the reasons why we didn't nuke Tokyo for the historical reasons. Like, would we try our best? I don't think we would go straight for Moscow, to be quite honest, or straight for St. Petersburg, although St. Petersburg was already pretty damaged. But there might start off to be some hesitancy. And depending on how this World War III went and how desperate we got, okay, then maybe we'd start being like, all right, I know the city's historical, but we got to get rid of it.
But hey, this scenario already relies on one historical figure acting out of character. Maybe if pushed to the extreme, Truman would have...
That's what I'm saying. It depends on how badly the U.S. really needs this, or the U.S. and her allies.
...done it, relegating himself to being one of history's greatest monsters. Being responsible for the death of tens of millions, obliterating Russia more than the Germans ever could. Or perhaps the Red Army leadership just gets angry at Beria immediately, marches on Moscow to spare their homeland from nuclear annihilation. Whether this ends in one city getting nuked, or dozens, it's not looking very good for Beria. The leadership complies with whatever Truman tells them to sign. So what might be the end result of this very quick, hot war? Well, I can imagine a mixed version of European republics with token monarchies, a completely pacified Soviet Union, one that might just fracture immediately. Eastern Europe would really be a mess. Could we see free elections? Perhaps. Could we see a mix of socialist and anti-communist factions fighting over the ruins? Perhaps that too. The last decade would really just be devastating for Russia, even more so than in our time. A 1-2 punch from the...
I mean, I really wonder if the Soviets, even with getting so heavily nuked, if they could still take over continental Europe at this time. I think they'd push. I think you'd be surprised, but they would probably be forced into surrendering if they didn't eventually develop their own nukes, which I guess in this scenario they don't.
The Germans and the Americans, an entire generation lost, probably two. And to the Russian people... these two enemies would be one and the same. During the Cold War, the USSR viewed the West as the continuation of fascism.
And that's so funny because that's the way Putin's Russia sees Ukraine, right? I mean, they're looking at they're saying the same things, basically the no-no Germans. I mean, for the Russian people, that is enemy number one. So if they can, like, frame their newer enemy as the de facto neo-German empire of this time, then that's what they're going to do.
And the Americans would have gone farther than the Germans ever did, finishing off cities that the Germans didn't even touch in the war.
That's a very good point. For a lot of Russians, in their eyes, they would absolutely be like the Americans are worse because of what we would have to do in order to win this World War III. I mean, of course there would be certain Soviets, certain Russians, maybe along that Ukrainian border and the Belarusian-Russian border that saw the horrors of Germany and would maybe still see Germany, but there'd be a lot of people way deeper into the Soviet Union, way deeper into like modern day Russia that would absolutely be like, no, screw the Americans, the Germans never did this.
And here's the thing, the Soviets might not even fall. If the Soviets didn't fall, what happens once they actually get a nuke?
Because it was probably only a matter of time. Like every year that went by, it was going to get easier and easier for all the countries. I mean, that's literally what we've seen in the past. The 9 countries that currently have a nuke right now, it just gets easier once the secret gets out. It's like the Industrial Revolution, you know? The first Industrial Revolution happens, and then bam, 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 everyone else joins in, but it takes time.
Say Beria is killed, the Soviets sue for peace, and then they just bide their time. Does the concept of mutually assured destruction even exist when one side was completely devastated before they got the chance? If the Allies beat the Soviets by 1950, perhaps this is just another chapter and a far greater conflict. Maybe, just like after World War I, Europe is just as unstable, and the end result leads to the next great conflict. This
World
is
War
Cody
IV?
of Alternate
Oh
History
man,
Hub.
I mean, who knows? If you peace out with the Soviet Union at that time, which they might be brought to their knees and just go to the peace deal. And then who knows what happens? I mean, the Soviets would have to wait generations because they would have just fought World War II and lost a bunch of their male population to the Germans. And then they have to fight the Americans who are going to nuke the crap out of them. They're going to just need decades before like a possible World War IV, but I could see it. Video makes 39 references to the title being "What if the Allies beat the Soviets by 1950?" Actual video title. Am I a joke to you? Can't believe a movie can do this. Fact, when Stalin presented Beria to Churchill, Stalin called him R. Himmler. Whoa, that's actually kind of freaky. Maybe the death of Stalin really actually did destroy this USSR in our timeline, and it took less than 40 years from his death for the USSR to fray. That's a good point. It just kind of took a little bit. I've seen so many scenarios where the World War III, the inevitable World War III that takes place, it happens because of other reasonings, but I like this video a lot because of the way we got there, the way we actually, and the little details. That's the thing. That's the good thing about Alt History Hub. It's not just a map, you know, where we have to kind of ponder. It's like, no, this is what happens. Stalin dies, Beria takes over, Stalin no longer has a nuke, and the added context of like America has a nukes, they have the biggest air force by far. Yeah, I think all those little details really paint the picture a bit more of what this could have looked like and just how horrifying it could have been. That analysis, I love that ending analysis about how, like, for a lot of the Soviets, they would see America as far, far worse than the Germans because of what we would have to do. In our eyes, we would have to nuke because that's the only way we're going to be able to defeat that Red Army at the time. Like, we just don't have the same stuff. We got the Navy, we got the Air Force, but we don't have that Red Army in 1946, 1947, 8. So, I mean, dang, but lots of things to ponder about that. Big old thanks to my patrons over at Patreon. I'm out here calling bro a history expert. Tambre, Drew's Argentinian Trust Fund, NordTyrol, Nolan, Miglu the Goat, LuxembourgLover, KirinoIsBestGirl, KingBearHaze, Fredrik Tibblin, DOOCHBAGGINS, Pavlik, Carmel Saida, AlexandertheTerrible. If you'd like your name here, check out that link in the description down below to patreon.com.